Hello. There's a lot of Moog Muse videos on the internet, but in this one, I am going to unashamedly cut straight to the aspects of the Muse that I think are the most interesting of all. From the sounds to features, and through the whole thing, I will make this thing sing. Let me show you what this can do. Does Moog Muse sound good doing basic sounds? This is a brilliant question, because it's one thing for a thing to be very capable, but what matters, especially when it comes to polys, is does it have source? Does it have a kind of innate character? Does the basic sound good? So here's a saw wave to which I can add a second one, tune it up a fifth. I then can add a third oscillator from a modulation oscillator, which is analog. And then I can pan everything in stereo and then add loads of release. Oof. Then I can add a filter, a bit of envelope. Love the stereo possibilities that are in this. But then there's a really important basic characteristic, which is overload. Without that turned up, then the mixer is actually quite clean with everything pulled up. But if we turn up overload, it will drive. Oh! How it drives now. Oh, mate. And then ring mod. And then finally, let's just make a sort of bass sound because, you know, it's a poly, right? So what you really want to do is make bass noises with it. Of course, that's true. Let's add some overload, come right down here, and just listen to... It's like basic bill. And then we can put unison on. Oh, mate. It's a thing. Now, one of the fundamental tonal things here is the wave mixer. That lets us blend between either a triangle and a saw or a square. You can have a combination of all three, as well as pulse width modulation for Nick, and then a bit of overload. A little bit of filter, and then we've got two oscillators, obviously. Third, or down a fourth is a nice one. Arpeggiator on. And then sync. It's fun, isn't it? Ring mod, that's the ring modulated version. And if we combine FM with sync, things get pretty nutty. Yes. Okay, one more. Let's do a 3 oscillator sound, because we've got a modulation oscillator that can run at audio rates. So if we wang all these up, there's 1. A 5th. Cannot resist the 5th. Pan it. Oof, nice. Lovely. But since we're talking about basic sounds, what about some of the more interesting ways that we can combine the oscillators? What are the FM capabilities of Muse? So FM is where we use audio rate things to modulate other audio rate things and create other tones. So if you have a basic sound like this, on Muse you actually have bidirectional FM. You can even create circular FM where both oscillators modulate each other, and you can choose the degrees, minimum and maximum degrees by which the oscillators modulate one another, so that when you do this and they're going in 2 different directions, then you can scale it and fine-tune this crazy FM madness. Plus you can FM the filters, because there's a modulation oscillator that goes at audio rates. And you can also do AM synthesis too, where you audio rate modulate. So let's try FM between the oscillators. We've got a basic sound. That, which I think needs a little bit of stereo. And if I go 1 to 2, the sound kind of goes whap, whap, whap. Then let's underpin this with a 3rd oscillator. Mate. And then what happens if we do it in the other direction as well at the same time? Oh, I don't know. Oh my God. things go fairly bonkers. And I think that's when we might want to choose the degrees by which one side modulates the other, which does the other. So for example, 1 to 2 was doing good things, but should we dial down 2 to 1? What in any case, if I turn this down, we create an uneven directional sort of modulation. We can apply this fully or partially, turn down these percentages to taste. So cool. Now in the basic oscillator section, we have these wave mixers. This is the ability to blend between two different sets of waveforms. But of course, if we're FMing the oscillators together, then we'll get different tones just from changing the wave mix. And I'm going to get ahead of ourselves and just mention a quick modulation thing, which is just assigning modulation, right? And for example, I might want the mod wheel to control that wave mix for me. I would do that by going mod wheel and then using the wave mix itself to control the amount by which it happens. Hit enter, and now Now, there was another aspect of FM, which is FMing the filters. So we can do this. If we initialize the sound, we have our basic filtration. Well, we can send audio rate things to control that dial for us, and it creates interesting sounds. So for example, if I take the modulation oscillator and make it run at audio rate, I send it places by using these special dials. So I choose filter 2 by this amount. Then I want to tune it. Wow. That is bonkers. What is it doing? Then if I articulate the filter whilst also audio rate modulating it, you're going to... Oof, that is pretty nutty, isn't it? What are the modulation possibilities in the Muse? The modulation is extensive, and there are a lot of really weird, interesting things that we can do, little details here and there and everywhere. Suffice to say that the modulation capabilities of the Muse are broad. In its simplest form, we have modulators like LFOs, and we have an assignable knob, this macro knob. We also have aftertouch on the keyboard, velocity on the keyboard, the lowness or highness of where we are on the keyboard, your great highness, the mod wheel. We also have an expression pedal input as well, and we can map that to parameters. And where we see a kind of square on the Muse is that when we push the square, we can send it to a control by moving the control we want to send it. And there's this very clever thing. On the screen, the control itself becomes the degree by which I positively or negatively send modulation. What's really crackers about this machine is this mod map. And in the mod map, we can see any of the 16 modulations that we can create. So for example, if I wanted to have like the, mod wheel controlling the cutoff, I could say, I want mod wheel here to control the cutoff by this amount and hit enter. On the mod map, I see the mod wheel is now controlling this. Happy days. However, in the mod map, you have also got things that we can use to alter, massage, and even transform a modulation, make a modulation really quite different. So for example, if I was to take LFO1 and hit assign, and now LFO1 is controlling the filter for me by this degree, that's fine. We'll hit enter. Now there's two things in my mod map. I've got the wheel, plus I've got LFO1. And I've got different shapes for LFO1, but the one I want to draw your attention to, if I come over here, we've got loads of different interesting ones. Chebyshev, based on Chebyshev distortion, folding flat, folding tooth, seasick. Sounds a little bit seasick, doesn't it? So we have these interesting user waves, they're called, that you get just for free straight out of an LFO without having to like modulate one LFO with another, which you can obviously do. But back to this mod section. So if I come in here, I could, for example, have it be a square wave. It's a bit hard-edged, isn't it? Let's go into here. Let's look at functions. Functions are ways that we can shape that modulation. And if I go to slew, what it's going to do is it's going to curve the starts and ends of that square shape. Listen. I just turned a square wave into a sine wave, didn't I? And there's a bunch of different ones. Cubic exponential, which has got a more exponential curve. Logarithmic. And so if I return to slew, what this is allowing me to do is shape an LFO into something just for this modulation. But for example, I could still use that LFO as a square wave LFO, and I could perhaps map it to oscillator 2, like that. And then if I come in here, I can choose the degree by which it modulates oscillator 2. Ooh. So now what it's doing is it's pushing up the pitch of oscillator 2 to a lovely tuned degree. But that one LFO is also creating a sort of slewed sound for my filter. I could slew it more. And the tricky thing that I've done here is I'm using one LFO and I'm getting two completely different shapes out of it independently because of my ability to shape functions as I send them around the Moog Muse. Now there's another type of modulation that we can do here. So here I've got LFO1 controlling the filter. We've got LFO2 kind of sitting pretty, not doing as much. This is LFO1 controlling the filter. But look, control. And I can choose LFO2. I can have it bidirectional or unipolar. And now, within this one modulation, I have the two LFOs modulating the filter. I don't have to use up another mod map. I can have the two things controlling it, which is cool. But then there's other things that I can do too. If I come to function source, yes, we're slewing these things. So if I come over here, we have logic operations, one of which is max, the other is min, sums the combination of the two. Let's try max. Then what we do here with max is that we create a new shape. Effectively, the two LFOs are playing on top of each other, and it draws like a line. The highest point that any of the LFOs is creating at that point is the shape that it creates. It actually is creating a new third shape by tracing the tops of the two LFOs. And from this, we can derive more complex LFOs from these two. So it's a really interesting thing. It lets us use just two LFOs and derive up to 16 sort of different combinations of those LFOs. And then one little control that's worth mentioning is this amplitude. That's the amount, the global amount that LFO is acting on everything it's sent to. And we can just sit back and listen as our two LFOs kind of work together. One's going super slow, it's like the sort of master conductor. The other one's doing the fast modulation. The two are unified and create a kind of homogeneous third LFO shape. So many other things we can modulate. One of my faves, not obvious, is release time. Let's use that slow LFO. There we go. And the macro controller, we could center any number of things and control them bidirectionally. What about the oscillators? What about the frequency? We could have it where the turning up of macro also turns down oscillator 1 for me. If I do that. So by turning macro down, that's up. This frequency is down. So I turn this up, this knob is now down, frequency is up. It's really bonkers. It's just like this one dial can push and pull things positively and negatively in varying degrees by which you decree. Now, there is some even more secret squirrel hidden stuff in the mod map. Here's, once again, the greatest sound ever made. And I love it when the filter settings are just slightly different from note to note. But at the moment, sadly, very static. And now there is a sample and hold in the LFO, and there is a keyboard reset. So we can make it so that every time an LFO is triggered, the key is pressed. But there's another way of doing this without using up an LFO. And that's if we come over here to sources, I can scroll through a little list, pitch LFOs, go back one. Random trig. And what that is doing is every time I push a key, it's creating a random voltage. It's not the LFO doing it, it's a magical mystery voltage coming from the gods to bestow our sound with variance. And we've got 16 slots, so we could have 16 random triggers. For example, I might like how oscillator 2 existing or not sounds. And so I may want the destination to be oscillator 2's mixer setting. How do I assign that without, how do I do that? Well, you push this down, this flashes. And then you can adjust the control, hit that, hit select. And then I'll go source, random trig, unipolar. So do you hear? Now this little fader is being turned up or down, up to 100% randomly, by this magical random voltage from space. It's from space. Let's get a triumphant third oscillator sound. I want my random triggers. Baby wants random triggers. Destination. Give me that, mate. Give me it by a large degree. So I could do swells with the mod. Fade out oscillator 1, so now it's only oscillator 2 in the mod oscillator. Keep you busy for quite a long time, I think it's fair to say. Now, this kind of random stepped modulation that we can create, obviously we can use it to do anything, like map it to almost any of the parameters. So we mapped it to the filter. I think a really interesting one is FM amount, right? Imagine if per step, your differing FM amounts would create this really sort of kind of like Matt Gronky sequencing thing, which is obviously what we buy this for, right? So if we start with, once again, the greatest synth sound that's ever been made, and start playing with the FM, can I turn this, what is probably one of the worst sounds ever made, into... Oh, that's a bit better, isn't it? So then let's modulate this. We'll make our source into the random trigger, and I want to adjust the FM amount. Let's take mono off. We've got aftertouch, haven't we? We should apply that to the filter. That's what Vangelis would have wanted. And as we apply aftertouch, I don't know if I've got the finesse that I need, so I'm going to slew the aftertouch amount. Describe how much better it makes aftertouch to interact with by having slew, the ability to smooth out my otherwise slightly erratic hands, so I can push up the filter with just a little extra depression. I would go so far as to say I would rather have slew on my aftertouch Aftertouch because I'm not a keyboardist. I'm a sound designer and a musician who just makes use of the tools as they are presented to me. Man, that's really good, actually. Are the effects good? Well, that's not really a question, because there's only one effect, kind of. That is to say this thing called a diffusion delay. Now, the diffusion delay, and I spoke to the sort of brains behind the Muse, the intention of this was to create something that was like a delay unit inspired by the golden era of expensive, posh rack mount delays of the 80s and 90s, which is to say, with a little bit of a kind of 12-bit old school character, but with some clever options. Kind of do reverbs and choruses and double duty as this kind of thing. So here's the greatest sound that's ever been made. And if I enable diffusion delay for timbre A, which is what we're playing with here, turn it up. We've got a feedback control and time. Independent time for left and right. You can clock this stuff. You can link the two, of course. Goes to 0 milliseconds. So we have the option of creating very zingy, runaway things. Very cool. That's the sort of, it's inspired by expensive, classy. And if we come to the triangle, there's a ton of stuff in here. More than I have time to go into, except there is a 12-bit and 16-bit resolution. Bit cleaner, bit grittier. Let's go grittier. You've got ping pong. You can choose how the delays, do they do that dive bombing pitch thing, or do they just smoothly crossfade without changing pitch? Then there's this character, and we can choose what the character knob does. Is it a notch filter? Is it a bandpass filter? Is it a tilting, like where it'll just make it dark or bright? Ooh. Ooh. You get the idea, right? But the thing that is really important to draw your attention to is character diffuse. Now, apparently, a reverb, an algorithmic reverb, is really just a delay with lots of kind of cross-modulation to smear itself into delayiness. And there's a diffuse parameter. If you turn this on and we turn character to the left, we suddenly hear this kind of reverbish-like thing. Let's turn on. And then let's have trippy. Yeah, that's diffusion delay, a mixture of delay, a pseudo reverb with a bunch of control. And we're still going. Why should I care about Bi-Timbrality? Bi-Timbrality is Muse's ability to make two different sounds at once. And that can be two sounds that are split across the keyboard, maybe like a bass line and a pad, or it could be stacked, very much like the Yamaha CS80, which was two complete sections of synthesizers layered on top of each other to make much richer, more complex sounds, or where, for example, you wanted to synthesize things like you want to have two components of a sound, both of which require complete use of an architecture. Well, that's what you can do with split and stack. And another thing you can also do is you can sequence the two timbres individually. So let's have a noodle and see what we could do with two timbres to play with. Right now, we have timbre A and we have timbre B. You have to take my word for it. Those are two different timbres. And because we've not pushed split or stack, we're hearing either or, depending on which one we press. But if we stack them, we do indeed get a 4-note sound, but we get a 4-note sound that's using two complete voices. So a very big sound. One of the things you might want to do is that idea of like flute synthesis, where you have the initial like chiff of the instrument with noise being followed by the tones of the oscillator. And to be fair, you can actually kind of do that with just one voice, because you could use an envelope and control the noise dial here, the noise volume, so that this fader kind of gets pushed up initially and then faded down. We could use one of the envelopes, or we know that we can turn the pitch LFO into an envelope and use it to do that. So we might not even need to use up two timbres. But let's do something that has two components. So let's make a weird, tuneful, but kind of FM thing that's percussive. And then let's have a little bit of audio rate FM. And then we move over to timbre B. A totally different thing. So then if we do stack, then let's have a really long envelope on this. Then let's have it be slightly longer. Then let's pan one right and the other left. Come up. And we need more PWM on that, like B sound. I really want to hear it like sort of breathing and drifting in a sort of beautiful way. We've got, oh no, I used up my... Let's turn down my modulation oscillator, knock it down and use it as a PWM source. Oh, it's nice with a little bit of... Let's turn down B. Amazing. So this allows us to have these much more complex enveloping sounds with different components that occur at different times, or one big sound. There's one more thing with Bi-Timbrality that I really want to try while I have this, my dirty little mitts. That's, you've got three oscillators, because we've got 1, 2, and the modulation oscillator. We've got 2 layers. What does it sound like doing a 6 oscillator sound? Man. Flippin' heck. Oh. I love that stuff. The capability to completely blanket you. Ace. Why should I care about the arpeggiator? That is a mean question, but fair. Like, often, personally speaking, arpeggiators are not as interesting to me as sequencers, but the arpeggiator in the Muse has been carefully thought through, and there are features in this that I have not seen in other arpeggiators that make it more like a sequencer. So what an arpeggiator does when on is arpeggiate notes. We have a hold button. However, in the little triangle are a bunch of other useful things, namely serial mode. What serial is doing is when you put some notes into the memory, it will not repeat a note unless it has played all of the notes, inspired by serial music. We turn it on. Then we can do things like turn notes on and off, which is just like what you might do if you were to send like a drum machine's trigger pattern into the arpeggiator clock of a Roland Juno 60, for example. You're creating an odd pattern that advances the arpeggiator. And we can have it with rest skip, where notes are either excluded or whether it pauses and then plays the notes sequentially, if that makes sense. You can choose whether they're omitted or not, which is more obvious if you're on ordered. We can change the length and the probability that notes will occur. Another thing we can do is leapfrog. If we put it into pattern mode, it will leapfrog forward by jumping forward and backwards notes in interesting ways. We can change the direction of the pattern. And so it hops around while we can also what lock loop is going to do is loop what the arpeggiator is doing at that point. So that all of these conditions that we've met that are causing things to be jumbled in interesting ways, a little fast one. Fun. So we have different ways of jumbling up the arpeggiation, frog leaping, but this looping, very nice. And the ability to have different patterns and to combine all of these things into one miasma of ideas. It's an arpeggiator that's more like a sequencer. Why should I care about chord mode? Oh, my dear sweet summer child. Chord mode is like the best thing ever. That's how we can push just a single key and beautiful, enormous chords will play forth. And the chord mode on here is interesting. You teach it a chord by pushing learn, and you press keys to add notes. We hit confirm or enter, turn it on, and we become 808 state. We then have pan spread. Life is good again. Of course, this isn't quantized to a scale, but that's part of the charm. I'm a big fan of that kind of transposed, samplery chord progression sound. But there is a very novel thing on the Muse, which I've not seen in any other polysynth, called key. The way this works is if we have key enabled and we teach it a chord, and then hit confirm, we then push a key and it will bake that chord into that key. That chord is baked into this specific key. This means I can continue to bake chords into adjacent keys and then play chord progressions just by pushing keys C, D, E, F, and so forth. So very quickly. If we then turn on the arpeggiator, we can arpeggiate those chords. Let me cut to some incredibly righteous sounding jams where I'm using this exact thing on chord mode to create something massive I could never play physically on the keyboard. Here Atlantics does a bass line and Muse will do a weird chord for us. Oh. Add a little bit of diffusion delay. And so here's one I made earlier. I baked 4 chords into C, D, E, and F. Bit of pan spread. Yeah, don't hate that. assign this to keys, one of the things we can do is Arpeggiator. Why should I care about the Muse's sequencer? This is going to be the hardest thing for me to explain because there's a lot to the sequencer to wrap your head around. Suffice to say that it's the deepest sequencer of any polysynth that I have encountered. It is a 64-step sequencer. We can have 8 notes per step. We can sequence the timbres individually. There is the ability to come in here and refine every aspect of the notes from exactly where they hit, their velocity, their gate length, what notes they are. We can invert notes and assign them to different timbres. We also have an entire separate lane of notes, which is available here. And if I hold Shift, is called coin toss. It's an entire other lane, and you can toss a coin to whether the notes are picked from that lane or from the main one probabilistically. There is also gesture recording where you're able to just twizzle a dial and bake notes into steps along with velocity and gate length. So if you don't know what you want to play, you can just twizzle a dial. You can also, by the way, run the arpeggiator and record into the sequencer and then edit your arpeggiator. That's a lot, but let's just get some basic, satisfying little sequences going and get the gist of it. The main page here of step is where you see the steps. Here I've got a 16-step sequence. And let's like feel out. That's nice, isn't it? Now I can hit record and just play that, but I'm going to hold down this step and push the notes. And when I've done it in that order, I touch the step and push the notes. Then I can... If I want to overdub, I can hold Shift and record. Interesting editing that we can do. For example, I can come in and I can transpose notes or entire chords, octave -1 or +1. I can invert or voice lead. Somewhere in there is an interesting kind of alternate melody that I want, a note that I want to occasionally pop into existence. Sounds like a job for coin toss. If I come here, hold Shift, I access the coin toss lane. And then I'm baking in notes into the coin toss lane. Beautiful. Now let's increase the probability. And that's the probability that it might use the coin toss lane. You hear it? It occasionally steals a note from the probability lane or from the coin toss lane. Oh, that is nice, isn't it? That's a very intense beat. How does that work? Is that tickling your muse? That maybe works a little bit better. Now, we can individually sequence the timbres, A and B, with this one concurrent sequence. If I move to timbre B, oh, that's nice, isn't it? Nice, isn't it? If I hold Shift and record, we see here that as we come onto these other steps, have A notes and we have B notes. There's a little thing in the corner here. We can come in here, reduce the velocity. And slip the notes, make them a little bit later. We can swap notes over to the other timbre. Back over to timbre A. It's a little musy friend, isn't it? Let's do another little sequence. Joined with a little bass line from the Intelligent Atlantics there. If you've enjoyed this video and found it useful, I would beg of you to please consider using the links below if you wish to purchase a Muse for yourself someday, maybe even today. It will help the channel at no additional cost to you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. basics. Muse. It's meant to be your muse. I get it.